out and joining us live. If you're here live, just say hello in chat or hit the thumbs up button. Or I guess even if you're not here live, then hit the thumbs up button, subscribe so you get the notifications and you see when we come back live next time. I think the next one will be Sunday, but get those notifications, hit the little button and all that stuff. All right, so welcome, Jason. Thanks for getting on here again. Short notice again. It's a strange
Yeah, it's all
time
good.
for us.
Well, like I said, I've recently found myself back on somewhat normal scheduled hours, so I don't have to worry. Previously, I had to try to fit this in between some American clients, some English clients, and then try to figure out a balance. But I have a bit more free time now, so it doesn't bother me as much.
Nice, nice. And you've been spending some of that time making videos.
I am, which takes a lot more of my time than I thought it did. I don't know how you do it as regularly as you do.
Yeah, it's weird. It's strange because I feel like when you're making videos, you'll get into this flow of it where it gets really, really easy, and then suddenly you'll try to make a video and it gets hard again. And it's like you get stuck on this one video and this one thing, and then it gets easy again after a while. just, or you
I'm
just switch
thinking,
to a new
yeah,
video.
I think that's what I might have to do because there's a video I'm currently working on. A little teaser for people. It's basically on the concept of guard clauses and cyclomatic complexity, which is surprisingly difficult to explain. It's one of those things where the code on screen will be like 4 lines. It won't be that much, but the reasoning why you change it from A to B and the different benefits and things it causes in the code kind of fall into graph theory. And so I have to cover a surprising amount of topics to just explain a couple of line changes, and I'm having trouble writing that as a kind of easy to understand script. And I'm also trying to create graphics to go with it to explain it and stuff. And so I might have to like long finger that one for a bit and make a simpler video for the short term.
Yeah, it's probably what I would do. Just shove it off to the side and then make something else a couple times, and then suddenly an idea will come that just like clicks and makes it easy. That's usually what happens for me. I get stuck on something for a while, can't figure out how to make the video work, and then randomly after a month or two, I'll get an idea that makes sense. Like, oh, okay, this is actually the perfect analogy, or the perfect way to explain it, or I'll see some code that works as a great explanation for it. So, yeah.
Well, I had a great conversation in one of the subreddits about or one of the discords rather, about law of Demeter and the general reason why the dot stitching the dots together is a bad thing, and how just by writing it on one line above doesn't get you away with it. A lot of people think if you just write a dot b dot c, if you just write var thing equals a dot b and then pass in b on the next line, you've somehow cheated the problem. But no, there's a greater philosophy of design as to why that's a good or bad thing. That might be an easier one to explain because that's just that's more about composition and inheritance and a few simpler topics.
Yeah, it's it definitely is one that I think would be a little bit easier to explain than cyclomatic
Mm.
complexity.
I also think it's one of those ones that it's one of the most misunderstood of all the rules. Because I've said this before, but a lot of people look at this stuff and the general takeaway is do this thing, it'll make your code look nicer. And it's like, no, these things are not stylistic. Like most of these things are not just arbitrary. It's like if you see a building and it's got a buttress, that sort of that extra piece that holds it up, that's not there just to look nice. It does look nice for certain kinds of buildings, but it's there for support. Like now, different things change over time, but a lot of these principles and rules, they don't just affect the visuals of the code. There is a principle behind how it affects scaling, affects the ability to make things modular. When you start talking about splitting it into DLLs, makes it easier to work with. In general, there's a lot more under the hood, and I think something I enjoy doing at least is really stepping through slowly and going, let's try it. Version A. What does that do for us? What is the downsides of the code? Let's now switch to type B. What does that do for us? And really trying to figure out, forget the fancy names. I'll admit, when you first start out, law of Demeter, cyclomatic complexity, these are scary. These are big, complicated words that sound like that's all gibberish, that's all academic nonsense. Well, they're fancy names, but fundamentally they're good rules, right? It's like you could say sanitization. That's a word that if you never heard it before, it's like, oh, what's that? It's just a fancy word. But no, there's a very good reason why you want things to be clean, right? And so a lot of this stuff I think is worth discussing, but it's like I said, it's a bit harder to structure a video around a fancy sounding term than to just sort of talk through the topics.
Yeah, because you really have to show the problem, right? Like you've got to show what something like that or what this law is actually solving or what it's preventing from occurring, which takes some buildup because in simple situations, like a lot of the big rules don't make a lot of sense, right? If you got a single script
Yeah,
or two scripts, doesn't make a lot of sense to worry about these things. But once the
exactly right.
project gets
It's like
bigger, so you got to have that example.
it's like the old thing about doctors washing their hands, right? Like in hospitals, doctors used to not know to wash their hands. It was never a thing. They would go straight from ripping out some organs over here to delivering a baby over there, and people would get sick, and there was no concept of transmission of germs. And so, if you try to explain washing your hands and it stops this magic invisible badness that goes from place to place, it's kind of hard to justify that. And I find with software development and larger scale rules, they come down to when your project gets bigger, when it scales, when there are bugs and issues to find. And it's like, how do you explain to somebody why that's valuable when they're just writing a couple of scripts? It can be a bit tough to find a good practical example. And if you do make a good example, it tends to be quite large, and then people kind of get they lose the forest for the trees. They get so focused on the lines of code you wrote, and it's like, no, forget the code. We're focused on the principle of why it's designed this way.
Yeah, it does definitely make it difficult. I think in your analogy there, they're not quite at the doctor level yet. They're still training on practice dolls, so they don't need to wash their
Yeah,
hands.
yeah.
So they don't understand it because nobody can get sick. Yeah, it's
The one I've always used too is that I think this is such a perfect analogy. I don't know when I came up with it. I thought it was pretty funny. Is that whenever you watch anyone who's a craftsman at their job, so if you ever watch a professional do anything, and this is like right down to you watch a magician who's been a magician for 10 years to a doctor to anybody, you watch what they're doing and you watch carefully. You can make judgments about what they're doing and then try to replicate it. But if you replicate it, all you know is what they did, not the justifications and the training that led them to that decision. So what I mean by that is if you watch a doctor heal somebody and they come in and they're sick, they've got a big cut on their leg, and they put a plaster or a band-aid on them or something, you'll be like, aha, if someone is sick and they come in, you put one of these on them and that fixes the problem. Or you wrap a bandage over it or you do whatever. And so you've got no understanding about the reasoning behind that. So if someone comes into you with a headache, it might be perfectly reasonable for you to say, aha, see, I know when you're sick, what you're supposed to do is grab this thing and wrap it around their arm, because you don't know the reasoning and justification. So I find if you just watch, if you look at a complicated project, you might come away with the wrong lessons. You'll see it as like, oh, that's how complicated code works, so I'll copy it. And so I always caution against people who say, can I have a big project, please? Can I see what a giant scale project looks like? I'll learn better that way. And it's like, I assure you, you won't. You'll see a big project, but you won't understand why. And if you try to just copy what's there, you will make spaghetti code that's worse than if you just left it simple, you know?
yeah, big projects are scary, especially people jumping right into them and trying to look at them. I talked about it before. I still remember first couple times that I downloaded and opened big leaked game projects as a kid. That's just totally lost, and it made it even harder. So, all right. So I wanted to talk. Speaking of big game projects, and as a kid, about one of the things in the title there, which was AOE, which for everybody who's been curious was actually really about it. Age of Empires. Age of Empires 4 had a technical preview this weekend, and I saw an email. Buddy Leon posted he posted it on Facebook, and I saw that. Went through, signed up, tried it out. It was totally free for the weekend, and it was freaking awesome. So I had a blast playing it the little bit that I got to play it, and was really excited for the new one to come out. Um, I didn't have a whole lot to say about it other than it was a lot of fun, and it kind of like reignited my desire to play RTS games even more. I mean, I've been slowly, loosely working on an RTS in my spare time, not getting a whole lot of work done on it yet, but playing some Age of Empires 4 really kind of got me more inspired because it seems really well done and really well put together. And I was taking a look at what their engine was and just kind of like digging into it after the alpha closed or the technical preview closed. So have you played any Age of Empires back in the day or
The
recently?
last one I played was Age of Kings. That was my golden era of Age of Empires, and I was a fan of the turtling strategy. I would very much build like 8 levels deep of walls and just build a giant a giant collection of. I think I specifically like elephants because there's something fun about throwing an army of elephants at people, and so I ended up. I won many a game as a war of attrition where a friend of mine had a better army than mine, but he would keep trying to fight down the walls. But I built them so far out that I could build more walls faster than he could break them, and so he ended up giving up because I had the better the better defensive strategy.
Nice. Yeah, it's still very much supports that kind of play from what I could tell. Or at least from what I was playing. I was building a lot of walls and putting a lot of dudes up on the walls and building defensive structures everywhere. It's yeah, it's pretty cool. It looks absolutely nothing like that. It looks more like that. Yeah. So it was a lot of fun though. And the multiplayer teamwork stuff was pretty good. The win conditions were pretty interesting. Overall, yeah, I was impressed. So, had a lot of fun with it. Now I just want to make RTS games and play. Well, I think more I just want to play RTS games a lot more right now. But now that I can't play it, I guess it's kind of ignited me to want to work on more RTS stuff if I get any spare time at all.
I just love for there to be another Dungeon Keeper. That to me was the best base building game I've ever played until they subsequently ruined it with later stuff, and then there just wasn't any more games, which is a pity. There's other ones like it. There's the one where you're Evil Genius, I think it's called. That one was fine too, but there's something really nice about games like that where rather than building on terrain, you're digging out tunnels inside of something because then you get to sort of it's a lot more creative I find because you get to choose your room sizes and build corridors and mazes and that starts to become part of the strategy.
Yeah, I really liked that one too. Did you ever play the online one? The what was it? I think it was Dungeon Keeper Online, the one that they made that was like a web game.
No, I played like 30 seconds of the mobile game and realized that you had to pay gems to break blocks and went, nope, I'm out. They have killed
Yeah.
the franchise.
I played one of them. I think it was that one. It was one of the ones that Sony was working with when I was there. So while I was there, I don't remember if they were publishing it or doing something. They were somehow involved with one of those games. And I played quite a bit of it. It was. I mean, I mostly played it because of that. Otherwise, yeah, I'm generally the same. Like if it just requires me to play gyms and sit and wait forever, like it's more of like an addiction than a game. So I try to avoid those at all costs. But so you said Evil Genius was one of the other ones.
Yeah, yeah, it's basically the same style. It's you're effectively uh you're an evil genius, I guess, and you're building your base and your secret base in the mountain and sending people off on missions.
Oh, okay. I've never played this. Looks interesting. I
Yeah, I
mean, I
like the
like the
idea
art
and I
style
like the
already.
style. Yeah, the style was very cool, but the problem I had with it was that um, it felt a little bit more hands off than games like Dungeon Keeper. Dungeon Keeper was very much like you would take control of your own minions and then run into the fight yourself, and you'd have a lot more like manual control. This one
Mhm.
just felt a lot more like you had to build a good base and you would send agents off on international missions and things, and it just didn't quite have the same level of manual control.
More automated, just like a set it and forget it style.
Yeah,
Interesting. I still have to try it out though, because that art style looks really, really cool.
yeah, it is very fun, and there's lots of really great animations, which is it definitely sells it.
Yeah, I'm gonna let me go add that to my Steam cart real quick. Wait, collector's. I was like sold out. It's a collector's edition. All right. Yep. I'm just gonna go add that real quick so I don't forget it. It looks really cool. And then yeah, if there's anything else I need to try out for RTSs, you gotta let me know, or just strategy games in general.
Well, I'm to be honest, I don't play as many as I used to. I used to play those back in college, but these days I'm more of a immersive sim style player. And if you're not familiar with the genre, because it doesn't sound like what it is. When you hear immersive sim, you think simulator, but it actually sort of stems from the System Shock style games back in the day, and it basically means a game where you enact control yourself over the environment, and that's how you play it. And the examples of this are games like Thief and Bioshock and Prey and Dishonored. And so it's a weird genre. Like whenever I hear immersive sim, I was always like, it always felt like the wrong title for me, but it's meant to be it's a simulated world that you get to have agency over. And so recently I was playing Deathloop, which is very similar in that style.
Deathloop?
Yep, that's the new one from Arcane Studios, the guys behind Prey. It's pretty cool. It's this interesting game where you're living a set number of days, and if you die, you reset and you lose all your items, and so you have to sort of try to solve the mystery over time, which is kind of cool. But it's a first person shooter where you have crazy powers and all the usual stuff. It's got stealth and you've got grenades and kind of attack stuff, you know.
Let me see. Let's pop this up. I'm kind of curious. All right. So you're on some alien planet, or is that supposed to be like the future?
Yeah, it's kind of the future. It's the problem is the kind of game where it's about the story, so saying too much
Oh,
about it sort of
okay.
spoils
Yeah,
it. You
you
know,
don't want to spoil the story. Okay.
it kind of feels like a more grounded Borderlands, for lack of a better word. It's this kind of wacky place where a bunch of people are drinking and having fun and partying, but it doesn't have the same slapstick comedy as Borderlands does. But it does have that sort of gameplay style. You don't have millions of guns and all of that. It's think of it like a multiplayer version of Dishonored to a degree.
Huh. I mean, it looks a little graphic, but cool.
Yeah, yeah.
Nice. So, speaking of FPSs, so we were talking a little bit about this earlier about these FPS kits because I saw this. Let me pop it up. I saw this Reddit thread. I want to share with everybody if I can find it, asking about essentially on how to make an FPS. And there's some questions in chat already about first person shooters and third person shooters. So I think that this might be a good kind of a lead into that if I can find
Hmm.
my link that I sent. Let me find this link real quick and I'll pop it up
You
and then
you posted it in the chat in Restream as well, so
I
we can.
did and then I refreshed the page and broke
All
everything.
right, I can send it back to you if you
Of
want.
course. Okay, here we go. I'll paste it right here and we'll pop it up. So just briefly talk about this. So the question, I thought this was a really good question that probably a lot of people starting with Unity have was if I want to start making a 3D FPS exploration style game like Tomb Raider today, which starter pack would you recommend and why? And when I read through this, I thought I have no freaking clue. I was like, I'm really curious too, but I bet Jason Story has a great answer. I bet he has experience with all three of these and can tell me exactly which one. And then I'll read down on the bottom part of the question too. So it says why maybe the first one was too what? Now I've lost it. What to start with today and why? And if I want to start, yeah, ignore those parts. So anyway, you get the general idea. So of the packs, there were three of them. There was the 3D game kit, there was the creator FPS kit, and the micro game kit. I'm gonna just pop them all up one at a time. So the first one was this 3D game kit, and is this the newest of them? I think it's got a
Um,
relatively late new release, right?
Actually, that was slightly older, actually, but it's the most filled out, and it's the one that has the most amount of content in it. But it's actually older than the other two.
Oh, okay, it's just recently updated or somewhat recently
Exactly.
updated.
Yeah, they literally had a team that was adding additional content to it, so it's probably the one that's had some of the most care put into it, I would say, in terms of scale and that kind of thing.
Here's the second one. I'll just get a quick preview. The Creator Kit FPS one. Oh, looks like they were probably all updated the same day, probably for a Unity release. So this is like the alien looking one, and then the last one was the FPS micro game. It was this one right here, which actually was updated even more recently, September 15th.
Mm.
So yeah, we talked briefly about this, but do you want to just share your kind of thoughts on which of these packs you would use,
Yeah, I guess
and why, or what for? Because I think there are different scenarios, right?
exactly. Yeah, to me, they're very different in terms of what they offer and what their goals are. That That last one you linked to is probably the most straightforward. And if you're looking to just sort of get your hands kind of into Unity, it removes a lot of the complexity. Because what people don't really appreciate is you may want fancy animations and all the cool stuff and particle systems and all that, but they are confusing to set up, right? And so having a simpler version is probably better. And this project isn't just simpler visually, but it also doesn't have stuff like, for example, that middle one has a specific shader so that the liquid inside the gun sort of shakes in an interesting way, and that's cool. But like some of this stuff can be confusing if you're just trying to get a handle on how the system works. So I would say if you're new, that other one is probably the easiest to start with, the micro game kit, and effectively it's easy to modify. That's kind of the point. They actually have modification kits for some of these where they like you can actually just find additional plugins like flamethrowers and things, and it's sort of there's actually video series as well they actually have on the channel, on the Unity channel, where they show you how to take this and add more guns to it or add more different things. So if you're trying to say start with this, get a handle on it, learn how to modify it, learn how to make your own enemy types, you'll have an easier time walking the journey with the FPS microgame. I even think Code Monkey and a few other channels also have basic introductions of how to add more features to it. So educationally, that's probably the best one to start with.
The micro game.
Mm.
Okay. And then what are your thoughts? So the second one there, the weird alien looking one, you said this one had custom shaders, and does it have a lot of
That
other custom stuff or
so this one is very very small, but what it does is it demonstrates a lot of things that people. It's kind of like the next level. Like if you are capable and fundamentally able to make a gun that shoots rectangles and hits things and takes damage, and you're comfortable, this one will start to get you introduced on the next step, which is custom characters and animations and having it look nice, and then building a little level creator where the levels actually snap together, and then having occlusion culling so the levels will turn off and on as you enter other regions. It's really basic. It's literally just some rooms, some corridors, some keys, and then enemies, and then a door to exit. Like there's not a lot in it, but the stuff that's there covers the slightly more advanced topics. If I'm being honest, I do think that stuff is probably covered better elsewhere in the likes of I Heart Game Dev's videos or Mix of Jams videos, or there's tons of YouTubers who will cover this stuff in a way that's a lot more bite sized and achievable. I think that it's very hard. Like I said, I don't recommend opening a project that's got cool stuff in it and then trying to reverse engineer the cool stuff. I think you're better off following along and making stuff either yourself and learning how to do it, or following some online video to do it and then try to modify it. And I think there are explanation videos for this one, but I have a hard time figuring out what its market is. Like who is the target audience for this one? I don't really know.
yeah. I guess if you want to figure out how to do some of the effects that they're doing and some of the cool stuff they're doing in there, or you just yeah, I don't know. Again, I barely ever end up using kits, so this is why
Same.
I thought you would be the perfect reference for this. I
I
usually
did
try
try
them
them
out
all,
and I'm
but
like, this
yeah,
is neat, and then I kind of jump over to
yeah.
rebuilding it.
Exactly the same. Yeah, I tend to start for that because they're great. They're interesting to see what Unity's approach is. As if it's different than my own, or if I learn something from how they would do it. But I usually find that I don't want to start with. It's the same reason too with an asset pack. If you download a level, a set of 3D models for a level kit or something, I don't like to import those into my project because it adds a whole load of, quite frankly, crap I might not use. So I will always install those assets into an empty project and then make an empty scene that has the bits I want, and then export that as a Unity package and then import that into my project so that I can keep it isolated and clean. And so I think that kit there is probably the best for learning the basics of like structuring sort of some of the system interactions, because that one has like AI enemies with pathfinding and doors where you have to hit multiple things at once to activate it. And the audio system is pretty well put together with spatialized stuff, and it's got reverb, and it's got a weapon system where you can switch between a melee weapon or a gun. It's got respawning set up. It's got death zones and trigger colliders. There's a lot of like fundamental concepts. Oh, custom gizmos. That's another one they have a lot of nice gizmos that demonstrate AOE ranges and various different things. Um, yeah, so I think that's a good one. Oh yeah, and Corey mentions that Mix and Jam has a video that expands on this and does this really nice camera zoom effect to kind of demonstrate how you can modify this further with some of the Cinemachine features. So I think this one's the most robust, but truth be told, I find it interesting to play with, but I would just probably start my own thing. If I was doing my own project, I would, depending on the kind of project, I would either base it off Kinematic Character Controller, which I think is the best single character controller to start from, or I would, if I was going for like a more frenetic run and gun type game, I would probably use a character controller similar to what Danny does in his videos. He has this nice sort of very rigid body, slick running character controller. It really depends. Like I think there's no correct one answer to the kind of game you're making. It really depends on what you're looking for. You know.
Speaking of character controllers, did you? When's the last time you looked at the third and first person controllers that they added in the
The kit
assets?
ones, yeah,
Yeah.
they're good. They the new ones by Unity, they're very very basic, but they like I. In fact, actually, I think I showed you. Remember, I did that little level where I had a custom package and it imports a thing. That's using the Unity's own first person character controller for that. The new starter kit. I think they call it starter assets first person or starter assets third person.
Something like that. It's in the package manager though. You can just grab it right from package manager. And I played with it quite a bit recently, and it seems relatively good. I think it's a good starting point for most games up until you hit some issue where you need to change it. But it seems like it covers just about everything. It's got a lot of the fundamental stuff, and it's got some decent separation. The only issue that I noticed with it was that out of the box, they're set up to only support the new input system, but it's like 3 minutes of work to make it work with the old input system if you don't wanna switch. So
Yeah,
it's not like
exactly.
it's a
And
lot of work, it's just not there for some reason. There's a comment there instead of the
mm.
code to make it work, right? Which is like 3 lines of code. Um,
Also, what I really appreciate is it uses Cinemachine. A lot of the
yeah.
older um, demo character kit stuff would just use like a handwritten camera script, and lots of them were a bit clunky and lacking features and whatever. But having a character controller out of the box that uses Cinemachine means before you've even written a single line of code, you have access to camera shake and reframing and zooming into different levels and third person and first person and the different rig sizes so you can have the character rotate in orbit. Like you get so many features for free just by starting out with a configured correctly Cinemachine rig.
Yeah, I think it helps a lot. It looks really good too, and it plays pretty good. You can push things around and jump, and you got pretty good control there. So I was a big fan of it. I think I'm gonna do a video about those sometime soon, just kind of a brief introduction on how to use them. If you guys are interested in that, at least, I assume people will be. Um, what other
My one
stuff?
warning, I think, is a little bit it's a little bit unintuitive for people who are not familiar with it. If you take the first person character controller, they are using a third person ish camera and it's set to follow the player with a certain dampening, which looks really nice. It gives you this smoothing when the camera goes back and forth. But if you modify the speed of the first person character controller and run forward, the camera will start lagging behind because it's got a dampening value. So what happens is you get this weird thing where suddenly the camera starts clipping into the model that represents the character. And if you don't know where to look for that, that can be very confusing. So underneath the virtual camera, you need to change the dampening and turn off the Z dampening. I think that was a bad choice on their part. It looks nicer, but it's very confusing if you don't know what they're doing. So I would have left it at zero when if I was the one making that sample project, because now it leads to this weird looking bug that might be hard to solve.
That's a good one. I didn't know about that. I guess I've never tried speeding up a character enough. Makes sense though. Somebody had mentioned another character controller in a humble bundle, but it's not one that I've seen. The Opsive controller. I did a quick search.
Opsive is a big one. They do a lot of stuff. In fact, I can't remember. I think did Opsive buy UFPS? I know there's Opsive and then Invector. I think Opsive is the big one. They've basically been consuming everybody else's various different projects. Yeah, it is. These
Oh,
guys
okay.
basically that they eat all of the other larger. Like you'll notice there, they have UFPS, they have Behavior Designer, and they're sort of trying to build this pretty comprehensive kit. It's got handheld weapons and guns in first person and third person. It's a very all round solution. Um,
Huh.
it's cool. It comes with doors and all these other parts too. That are if you wanted to get if you genuinely did want a quick start, you probably would get faster than anything else by using Opsive,
Use
I would
something like
imagine.
yeah.
Um, but the problem I have with this is if you start design a project around an asset like this, what you'll find is you won't design features you want in your game. You will just start implementing features that are supported by this. So you'll be like, oh, this thing has gravity like support, so I will add gravity to my game. This thing has horse supports. So you won't be designing your game. You'll be designing the game they give you, right? I find you're better off. You'll have a more interesting time if you start by figuring out the game you want and then trying to build the mechanics. Because then your game becomes your game and not just an amalgam of whatever features are available in the asset pack you bought. You know?
Yeah, this looks really cool though. I mean, I think
Yeah,
especially
yeah.
if you were gonna build a prototype of anything, you wanted to just put up like an FPS prototype, this looks like a perfect start, assuming that all of these things are included and easy to do that are in this trailer,
Yeah,
but,
it's
I
it's
mean,
all included. Yeah, like there
that's
is
what I
you
always
get
assume. Yeah, it looks
you
really
you get
good.
like you get weapons. You get it's got health systems. It's got weapon switching. It's got recoil, footstep
Yeah,
sounds.
different
All of
terrain
those
types,
fundamental
yeah, it looks
concepts.
like
Yeah,
I mean, it looks like you basically get, like, an FPS, right? Like
yeah.
or I s does it have, multiplayer support, or is it just local multiplayer?
I think that's a separate one, but I think think you can buy their multiplayer support. I can't remember. I
Wow,
will say, if I'm being brutally honest, before this, it used to be UFPS. So this is a different product. It used to be Opsive's third person character controller, and then separately there was UFPS, which is a different product by a different company. And at
right.
some stage, they bought UFPS and they integrated it. Then they added their own first person controller. They merged everything together. They started making all of these like multiple components and then combined them, and then you basically could buy the rig you want. So you can buy Ultimate Character Controller, which gives you all of it, or you can buy the separate parts that do whatever. And in doing so, they kind of clearly merged the code bases and simplified it, which means you get more features, but the general feel of the character controller is just a little clunkier to me than it used to be. UFPS was about giving you a sort of Doom level control over your character controller. It had a lot more control over really slick um, spring joint stuff for your guns. It had really nice movement for velocity based stuff and having material control. A lot of it that is still there, but it's harder to get at and it's more built around a very sort of structured style. I guess the point is, I had a lot more fun playing with the original UFPS than I did playing with the Opsive controller, which it's fine. I find myself wanting to start from scratch rather than using something as big as this because again it's very what was the word we used before? It's opinionated. Like once you use this, you're using this. There's no getting around it. Like you're using their inventory, you're using their solution for health, and if you want to decouple any of that stuff, you're in for a tough time.
Yeah. That's understandable. So if you wanna build it your own, yeah, you'd wanna use the FPS one. It looks like that's here, though. That's the one that's actually in the bundle is UFPS, not the character controller one. So you just have
Yeah.
that, not the full I was actually hoping the full character controller one was there. I was like, "I'm gonna grab this bundle." Although, after looking at it and seeing that there's a bunch of cool stuff in here, I'll probably just grab this bundle anyway.
It's that's a good one. Like the other one too, the one at the top right. There's the little guy with the cap. That's a really nice one for gravity stuff. It's a really lightweight, simple character controller that has really nice gravity control. You can switch where the up axis is for your character. So if you just wanted a game where you could walk on walls and move between different areas, that's much simpler and cleaner and easier to work with than something like UFPS.
Oh, okay, that one looks pretty cool. There's a lot of cool stuff in here. A multiplayer shooter template. Looks
Highlight
kinda fun.
Plus is another one. I use Highlight Plus on lots of projects. It's probably my favorite, or
Where
at least
was
it was
that
my
one?
favorite highlight. Up there,
Oh,
yeah.
right there.
That's been my favorite highlight plugin for a long time. I haven't used it recently because of the whole. I mean, with shader graph, you can just make your own stuff now. It's pretty straightforward. But before the new render pipelines, I used to use that on all sorts of stuff.
One looks really cool. Oh, a lot of good stuff in here. Yeah, I'm surprised I didn't get this pack yet. I must have totally gotten distracted and missed it. It's all kinds of neat things. What's down here at the bottom? Oh, okay. It's all just in a single bundle this time, huh? They have the $1, the 9. Yep. Okay. Cool. There was something else I wanted to share too, which was the. Let me see if I can find the link to this. There's a game jam coming up that I keep forgetting to talk about. Let me see if I can find it. Oh, and it looks like there was a super chat that just popped up too. Let me see if I can. Sorry, I'm just sitting here clicking around and letting everybody watch me click and and talk to myself. All right, let's share this one now. So there was a Backtrace game jam that's coming up in 3 days. I was gonna check this out. I was hoping I would actually get to try to be in a game jam just because I've been wanting to do one forever. But the stuff I told you about this morning has kind of put that on hold for now, so I probably won't get to compete. But I did want to share it. If you're looking for another game jam, they're starting another one up in 3 days. Just look at the link down below. You can go check it out too and sign up. I'm not sure if they've announced the theme yet though, so kind of curious to see what it ends up being. But I wanted to share it anyway. Yeah. So you want to take some questions, Jason?
Sure.
Oh, I've still got this one up. I know there have been quite a few questions that have popped up, but I think they're all way, way, way scrolled off. Somebody's hoping that you keep your streak alive and your next video stays saying opinionated in every episode.
Well, what can I say? It's a politer way of saying some assets have a habit of strangling your project and embedding themselves root deep into it that make it impossible to work with later. Um, I, I just because I come from a background of enterprise software, my general problem is a lot of asset developers are building assets not for you. They're building it for them. They're building the thing they want. And then when they're done, they're like, oh, that was cool. Someone will buy this. And they put it in the store. And that's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. But you're not actually buying a kit like you think you are because the person who built it didn't design the asset for you to Lego block together yourself a game. They're giving you the thing they made that has the features they wanted. And unless you know what you're doing, you'll have a hard time adding, changing, or modifying it. And so when it comes to almost anything in Unity, I will always separate it out. Here's a very simple example. I built a project earlier this week where I'm using Unity Analytics. Now, I'm probably going to always use Unity Analytics for this project. There's no reason not to, but I still didn't write the Unity analytics.dispatch event or whatever line, because if I do that, I am forever and always tied to Unity Analytics. I made my own jsonstory.ianalytics, and then that happens to use Unity Analytics. So there is now one place in my code where all of my scripts refer to the concept of analytics, not a particular implementation. And if I decide later to send all of that data to a different analytics platform or to save it to a text file, I can do that. And I find that if you use an asset, something that big, you have a really hard time doing that. Like I can't draw a neat line around Invector or one of these other character controllers because they are literally your character and your health system and your level transitioning system and everything. Like, where's the line that I can draw to neatly carve out the bit that I could safely swap out if I wanted to? So I find that if you build it from scratch, like I could literally write a system that uses my favorite character controller, kinematic character controller, because their stuff is like 4 scripts. It's a base class, a few things. I could write my own version, and if I wanted to, I could literally make 2 prefabs. One that uses Unity's first person, one that uses kinematic, and everything else in my system is completely decoupled. And I could release one to clients or to friends who happen to have that asset, and I could release the simpler one if I was releasing it as source code, and I wouldn't have to change any of my code. I would have split the line right down the middle. I can't do that with a opinionated system, right? So it's not just a stylistic choice. Again, like I said, there's a very academic reason why I don't like using an asset if they don't clearly define their own boundary lines for what I can or can't separate from their code.
That's understandable. I feel like that's something you get as you get more and more opinionated about how things work, and you kind of actually go through the process of having to swap things out and change them multiple times. Like you start to feel that way. So I wanted
I
to quickly say thanks for the super chat, by the way. While it's popped up, there's no message there, so I don't have anything to read. But I just wanted to pop it up and say thanks.
Because I can't be the only person who's bought an asset or something and went, oh, this has one nice feature I want. This one thing, this little cool thing that I want from the asset, and you open it and you look for it, and it's like, oh, that's part of this thing. I need this whole thing to get this one little feature I want, and then you end up not using it because you can't rip it out from the center of it. You know.
I've done that many times. A lot of the time, though, or maybe half the time, what I found is that what I can do is just look at what they've done and then recreate the piece that I want. Because a lot of it is like I'll take the art assets that they did and the bit of code that's doing it, and I can just kind of rewrite it decoupled once I see the trick that they've done. But yeah, I'd say at least maybe half the time I end up just like, oh well, that sucks, or like, oh, this doesn't actually do what I thought it did. It's just like a trick to make it look like it's doing that. Like I could have done this and it's not going to actually work in our game because, we have other real requirements. Happened many times where I thought I was getting something magical and it was just kind of like a simple trick. I was like, "Oh, whoops. I misunderstood, misread what was going on there."
Yeah, I think the biggest example for me ever, and again, this is another one of those classic examples where it's not the developer's fault because they didn't build it for me; they built it for them. There was a character controller called Super Character Controller. I think it was called Super Character Controller, and it was, you might have seen this a long time ago. As a demonstration of his own character controller, he built Mario 64 Bomb on Battlefield. He like just built Bomb on Battlefield. It's really cool. Like you can find a video online somewhere where it's literally that level in Unity, and he's got all of the right pieces in place. You can do backflips, you can do side flips, you can do all the stuff Mario could do. It's a bit slidier. The material stuff is a little bit kind of, it's got that Unity-ness to it that the old one kind of felt a bit tighter with, but like mechanically it's all there. You can jump on the heads of enemies, you can do the backflips, you can jump into cannons, you can all of this stuff. And I was like, this is really cool. The Mario 64 character controller is my favorite character controller, or at least one of them. And so I wanted to just put a rectangle down in an empty scene, copy the character, and paste them into the empty scene, and just run around on a platform and just sort of see what happens. And so I did that, copied the character in, pasted it into a new scene, and then pressed play, read errors. Character needs, cannot find component level manager. It's like, okay, so I went back into the other scene, opened it additively, pasted in level manager, press play. Red errors. Can't use this. Level manager requires enemy manager. Say, okay, so go back to edit manager. And I just did that. And by the end of it, I had copied in 30 prefabs of different things, of different sub managers and systems and stuff. And it's like, what was my original intent again? Oh, yeah, I wanted a guy where I can press up, down, left, right, and jump, and he does character stuff. But because what happened was, there were specific lines of code in the character controller that said, if this enemy happens to be this type of enemy, as given to me by the enemy manager under this context, do Y. And that's just a matter of the experience of architecture, right? Like it's,
Yeah.
again, he didn't build it as an asset. He built it for himself in a demonstration and was just nice enough to release the source code. But it was frustrating. Like it's just an example to me of like, I can't use the bit of this I wanted to use, you know?
Yeah. I guess that's the difference of it being built just kind of thrown together not for you and put together built so that it can be maintained long term for you or whoever's building it. And I mean, in that case, not a whole lot of value in making it better, I guess. I guess there's probably no value at all in making it better, really. Probably just
Mhm.
would have taken a little bit more time right, to
Well,
figure it out.
especially because it got Nintendoed very quickly, and then he had to take it down again, and so you can't really find it anymore. I think I have it somewhere in my Google Drive in the back of a cabinet somewhere, but it very quickly got removed. So I think, yeah, you're right. It wouldn't have been much better to waste time architecting it any fancier. But it from a personal level, that's the thing, is I come from the side of it where I look at my code as pieces of modules that I want to move and put into other things and playtest. And so I try to make sure theoretically I could take any prefab, drop it in an empty scene, and if it needs an enemy manager, it will still presume it doesn't exist and work as best it can. Right? There's a general concept in programming I like to call batteries included, where you shouldn't have to, the minute you drop something in, try to figure out how to make it work. Almost anything you use, if you drop it in, it should do something. Maybe it's not configured exactly the way you want, but it should work first. And then you
Mhm.
can start to learn how to get to do what you want. If you drop some asset or some behavior in from some asset store thing, and the first thing you see is errors, like you're not going to really want to go any further, right? You're like, I can't, what do I do with this? I don't even know how to make it work. Never mind, make it do what I want.
Yeah. Totally agree. Got to work on its own. So, we got a couple questions that came in. Before we answer them, though, I just wanted to tell everybody to please hit the thumbs up button or share the video somewhere, share the stream somewhere. It does help a lot and definitely appreciate it. But the question that I've got popped up right now was about whether or not either one of us is planning on revisiting addressables anytime soon, or scriptable objects, or animator behaviors. Are these topics that you're currently looking at, interested in talking about, or anything else?
Um, I'll be honest, not really, because I've said before, I have a strong separation in my mind between architecture and implementation. And scriptable objects are a tool. It kind of feels to me like someone saying, "Oh, you've got a YouTube channel. Are you going to focus on how to use hammers?" It's like, well, probably not. I mean, at some point, I might build something and I might use a hammer, but I'm not going to
But are
do a
you going to
video on
talk
hammers.
about them? You may not need to focus on it. Do you plan on doing a video about them
Um,
anytime soon?
Well, I
Some
mean, I use scriptable objects. I'm sure they'll come up. Probably not animator behaviors because it's from my perspective. I don't like getting into the weeds of you. There's like people have done that better than me. Like if you want to do animator stuff, go look at iHeart Game Dev. Go look at Mix and Jam. Go look at
Mhm.
who else does. I think there's so many different other creators that do kind of the more visual side of that better than I would. I'm going to be stuck on predominantly the boring code optimization and efficiency and tool development. That's kind of my area.
All right. And then what about addressables? Something you've been interested in or needed to use?
I've used it on a few projects for client stuff, um, but personally, I just don't find it interesting enough to make a video on. Like, I don't, you know what I mean? It's a tool that you can
Mhm.
use. It's a valuable one to have in your belt. But like Unity have a video series on it.
Yeah.
There's some other guides out there, and fundamentally, it's just learn the menus and the options. I don't think there's a lot of reasoning through or sort of explanation. Like you just basically learn, mark them, label them correctly, make your groups, learn how to call the methods to check to pull them down. Like there's not, I just don't know what what I would enjoy talking about the topic, you know.
Right. Makes sense because it has gotten I think, somewhat straightforward where you don't need to think about it architecturally nearly as much. You don't have to do everything asynchronously anymore. And it's yeah. It's also one of those problems that people only run into like once, right? As they get much deeper into their career. Like you get to the point where you've got a project that actually needs to do some updating over the wire and stuff, and then you figure it out and you learn it. But it's definitely not a widespread thing. So it's one of the reasons that I don't talk about it too much either. Because as much as I think it's useful and interesting, it's only useful and interesting if you have that specific problem right now, which is a tiny number of people. So the content just isn't very popular. People aren't that interested in general. I do talk about it a little bit in some of the more advanced stuff, but not very often though. And then for me, for scriptable objects, I plan on doing some more videos talking about them. I've done some somewhat recently, and I use them quite a bit in my coursework as well. But I have a couple other scriptable object ideas and videos that I'll probably talk about, or just talk about different ways to use them. I've already talked
Well,
about ways to use saving and
you've covered
events.
the scriptable object event. Yeah, I was gonna say you've covered the scriptable object event architecture stuff before, right? So
Yeah, did events, and I believe I've done some stuff on scriptable object persisting that was not in coursework, but it's been a little while, so I'm not 100% sure. But I had a couple other ones that I was thinking about doing in there. So yeah, a little bit there, and I got nothing on animator behaviors. I'm kind of like Jason. My visual skills are a bit lacking. And somebody asked about UFPS. If that was, what do you think of it? Is it something you would use outside prototyping, or would you only use it for prototyping?
um I'll be okay, this maybe this is just the Old man shouting at clouds thing. I would have used the old one. I don't like the new one. There's something about it. There's something about the way it's configured or the way it works that whenever I tried to use it, it just felt clunkier. It felt more opinionated, as I said, than it used to when it felt like just a basic character controller. Um, Besides, like if you look on YouTube, there are so many people doing this. Like I said, Danny and other channels like that. There's a whole lot of people making like little first person shooter games where you have hook shots and whips and teleport jumps and like you can find so many guides of people making like their first person shooter, and those they're all interesting in their own right, slightly different approaches, and there tend to be like two or three scripts. I don't think you need UFPS unless you are prototyping all the other bits that come with it, the ammo and the inventory and the swapping out stuff and the health bars and the managing camera shake and like visual look and all. Like there's a lot in there, but the truth is like a lot of it is stuff you it's harder to tweak than if you just go, right, I like the idea of this project. Now I'm just going to write a simple script that has a character controller, add some velocity. I have a parent game object with a bunch of gun child objects. I turn it on enable. The animator starts and it moves it into frame. And then I just, like you can very quickly get what you need from it and prototype your own stuff. I think UFPS's strength is exactly that, is the prototyping. I just don't think I would use it beyond that.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, you just start it off, you prototype it, you build out, proof out whatever it is that you want to build. I mean, like the custom thing. Like you're building an FPS. You're not just building, the default UFPS. You've got to have some special idea. I assume at least that you've got some idea that makes your game unique and special, whether it's the art and the story or some other gameplay mechanic that you can hook in with the UFPS or whatever thing you're using to prototype, right? You drop that in, make sure that it's good, and then you can swap out the controller and all that stuff later once you've proved out your game and all that. So, all right, this next question was about architecture stuff in the architecture course. So it says, I'm going to help you plug a little because I need a question answered. What types of architecture topics are covered in the architecture course? Working on a multiplayer turn-based strategy game at the moment. So, turn-based strategy stuff is definitely not the type of thing that we focus on in there. It's more, I guess, it's a real brief overview. The architecture course focuses on building large systems that all kind of interact together and that hook in together and I guess really just interact together. I can't get my words out right, but um, so it's covering things like game persistence, persisting across multiple scenes, saving multiple levels, or saving off multiple games. One of the most recent lessons that we just got into was placing objects, so crafting and placing control panels, dropping them down to open up doors, and then making those customizable for the game designers. We'll be going into, let's see, character controllers, shooting, combat, dialogue systems. There's just a lot of different stuff. It's hard to discuss architectural topics. I need a good answer for this. Like I've got like a nice big sheet of all the stuff, but like coming up with it off the top of my head when we
Well, I
have
mean, I've taken the course, so I can give you a run through about the stuff that stood out to me. Like you had separation of concerns between your UI and the events that were happening. You had a quest system that's very kind of separate out the concept of uh, generating quests. You had dialogue that interacted with the quest system that would allow you to complete dialogue things that would then further the state of it. You had persistence for all of that stuff that was there. You had a general sort of like doors and things that would open relative to it. An inventory to collect items that would then have filters and queries for those quests. Mini games is another one. It's a whole system to engage with, having mini games that would activate and then have different win or lose states. There was a lot of architectural stuff
your
covered
memory
there.
is a lot better than mine. And thinking about it, yeah, on the interactable stuff is kind of where we're going next. And for all the students, those lessons so I'll be talking about it in the Q&A later on this week, but some crazy stuff this week. But the lessons on interactables will be diving into a large thing on refactoring. And I've kind of set this piece up and I think it's kind of culminated into a part where we're going to get to do a medium-sized refactor and see exactly the right way to do that process and kind of go through that without breaking things and without making a mess of stuff. So it's a lot of just talking about code and solving code problems. So that's kind of the core of it. All right, enough about my stuff though. Let's move on to some other questions that people have. Oh, somebody supported that people don't support. I get frustrated that asset devs won't support Unity on Linux. Little things like custom inspectors can be a big issue. I would say that I wouldn't expect this to ever change. I just kind of wanted to pop this up because the asset developers, most of them probably don't even have Linux installed or know how to install Linux or have never even
And
installed
honestly,
Linux.
here's the really harsh truth. Now separately from developing on Linux, in terms of actual market share, like I know a lot of game devs who put out games, and some of them have been polite enough to show me their numbers. So I have seen purchase percentages and what their market share is per console, per platform, per whatever. And I can tell you this now: we're not talking 30%. We're not talking 20%. We're talking sub 5%, if not less. Right?
Talking sub 1%.
Yeah, yeah. That's best case scenario is 5% of your audience would be on Linux, and that's if you're that's if you're marketing it as a Linux based game, right, or a game that's primarily supported. Realistically, people don't buy games and play them on Linux. Like it just doesn't happen. And so the question is, how much of your dev time and resources should go into something which literally will not affect your bottom line? Like the time you spend to ensure Linux support will literally cost you more in terms of dev hours than it will gain you. It's just not worth it. Like nobody's going to do it.
Yeah, I've seen the same. In every one of them I've seen the number is at 1% just because it doesn't show a zero. And it doesn't have decimal points. It's always low. And same for Mac too. I mean, Mac is always at a tiny, tiny portion. I know that occasionally there's like a game that's popular on Macs, and some people have some little bit of success there. But overall, I mean, the majority of the money being spent on video games is happening either on mobile stuff, consoles, or PC. It's or Windows.
Now,
Sorry, I should say Windows,
that being
not.
said, that's a very good chance that might change. I mean, as one of the many people out there who's pre-ordered my Steam Deck, I have a strong feeling that it might start to sway the numbers. Probably not drastically in the short term, but I do think the idea of a Switch competitor console that runs Linux is kind of it's going to impact the industry somehow. I'm not sure how much, but it's definitely going to.
And that's the new Steam portable device, right? For
Yeah.
everybody hasn't seen it yet. Yeah, it's made by Steam or Valve to run Steam games, which I think will be interesting. I'll say thanks for another super chat. No message again, but thanks again. Really appreciate it. If you got a question, feel free to drop it in too. Anything you wanted to know. Let's see. What other questions do we have? Is there anything that's popped up in here that you've seen and wanted to hit? Oh, there's a question about Odin. Um, I don't know if I can find it still, but they were asking, yeah, is Odin a barrier to cooperation since they require everyone to work on a project to have bought them? And I wanted to pop this up. Well, one, because it's here, but two, because I was actually looking at I randomly stumbled on an Odin video like 3-4 days ago. No idea why. YouTube just popped it up, and it was like a tutorial about Odin licensing. And I was like, oh, that's weird. And it just auto played. And I was like, oh, okay, I learned something new. Apparently, with their setup, you can now download like a version for your company. So you put it into that project, and it just auto associates anybody who opens it with you, and then you can mark whether or not they actually use Odin in the project in the thing, and then add them as a license and stuff. So it seems like they've made it a little bit easier to work with, or they're trying to make it easier to work with. I haven't gone through the process myself, but I
I
mean,
I appreciate it. I appreciate the attempt, and I've like had this conversation with people before. But I'll be honest, if you spend a week and learn how to write your own editor tools, and then you write a couple of base scripts that are yours that you can include with any project you make, I can make a custom inspector with buttons and drop downs and scroll regions and different colors and banners, everything I want, and I can do that for a new script um, with about 12 lines of code. Like I've gotten it to the point now that I can take any script, write a custom inspector for it in about 10, 12 lines. And that'll have any buttons I want. It'll have conditional logic, and I have complete control over it. And then I can just ship 2 scripts, the thing and an editor folder with the thing inspector. And so for me, I can see why it would be nice if they had some sort of enterprise style license, but it's still a hoop. And I personally don't want to cause that issue with clients. I can just say, I can give you a specific thing. And also, maybe it's a point of personal pride too, but I kind of like being able to deliver a custom product, right? So for people who don't know, I do contract work. So I tend to often get asked to build a system. So think of it like I make bespoke assets for people. Like I make a dedicated, someone wants a system to do X, I will make a system, I will then deliver to them like it's a Unity package. And having custom editor tools that fit their requirements is a nice touch, I think, as a contractor. Um, so yeah, I don't know. I think for a large personal project, I would probably use Odin myself because it cuts down on a lot of time. Like I've mentioned before, they have this one attribute called inline inspector. The ability to take every scriptable object in my project and be able to open it in line without having to click it, go to the asset, open a second inspector, and view the contents. That saves me like minutes every time I do it. And then you scale that up by the size of a project. That'll save you hours, which saves you a lot of time and money. So it has benefits that I would use, but not for deliverables and working with teams.
Yeah, I would use it for personal projects where I don't have to ship it, and I know I'm not going to ship it to anybody, or really ship the source to anyone, or group projects where the team has kind of agreed on it, where the team is all kind of on board with it. I've been on teams where everybody really liked Odin and was all for it, but on other teams where everybody kind of was averse to using any editor tools or any extensions and really wanted to minimize those. So depending on who the team is and how it is, if it's something that you need to like widespread share with other people though, then yeah, that's where it's a barrier. If you need to like publicly share it and send it out to people that aren't part of like your actual team that you've built up or whatever, don't already have their licenses for it. So yeah, but outside of that, I like it. I mean, it's a pretty cool tool, and I mean, I think it shows where the Unity editor will probably be like in 5 years, right? Like it's gonna eventually all that stuff will slowly get pulled in. Any other questions that you wanted to hop into? There's a lot. I was trying to scroll down through
There's a
here.
lot, yeah. Like I'm just kind of going through.
Somebody wants a
Uh,
video about custom inspectors. You're gonna do that? It's got
yeah,
seconded.
that is on the list. That will eventually be made, but I guess from my perspective, part of the strength of doing a video on custom inspectors is not just like if you want to learn how to make a custom inspector, go watch 6 hours of Freya Homer talking about it in vivid detail. You will learn everything you need to know about tool development. So I don't want to just replicate content that's out there. Well, if I'm going to be making a video on custom inspectors, it'll be architecting your own little library that lets you make further inspectors very quickly. And that requires me to have set up some prerequisite information around how to build your own base classes and how the serializer works so that you know how to save out the properties, when you'd want to favor using custom property drawers versus custom inspectors. And there's a lot more theory behind that I'd have to cover. So we'll build up to that one. That's not going to be just a quick video.
Yeah, and it's given me the idea of making a quick video on it. So now I'm gonna I'll
Yeah,
let Jason make
you can
an
take
in-depth,
that.
complicated one. I'm gonna make a very quick one. That seems like an interesting one. Just kind of cover the very basics of it and wrap it into like an 8 minute little bubble. And somebody would love to see a video on asynchronous scene managers.
Oh yeah, don't get me started. That I remember spending 2 weeks deep diving into the Unity plus scenes concept. How do you solve all of the problems? Should you use your own async wrappers? Do you like store the async operation? Do you load them as additive scenes? And if you do load them as additive scenes, do you let them run immediately, or do you mark them all as not initializing after load and then manually load them? Do you like? There's so many parts to this that get really frustrating. And the real kicker, after all of that research that I looked into, is it's virtually impossible to have a scene transition that doesn't generate garbage. Like it's always going to do it, and depending on how you've architected your scenes, it's always going to blip. Just that one little blip where it just does that, just like cuts. Because the way it works is when the scene loads, it hits all of the awake functions, and all of those awake functions, most people are calling get all of X, configure all of these, find all of type, or something. And so that first hit of the next scene is almost always going to cause some jitter to the point that it's infuriating. It's really small, like it doesn't have to be a big deal, but it's enough that to me it just feels that it's a little bit unprofessional. And that's why one of my favorite like hacks for Unity, I've said before, is using Fmod. I recommend Fmod for audio in general. I think it's the best solution for audio, probably outside of Wise, but it's a whole different conversation. But the main reason, if you just use Fmod, one thing you get for absolutely free is because it's running as a middleware that's separate from Unity, any music that's playing when you transition scenes keeps playing. And that little thing hides that blip of scene transitions that you'll probably, even if with audio, even if you use your own static audio manager and you're playing music and you cut scenes, it'll play the same music across scene. That'll be fine. It'll still continue playing, but it'll just cut just that little just for a split second, and that infuriates me. And you can't really solve that if you're using Unity scene loading. So you have to use something like middleware for that.
Push it on to another thread. All right. And Chris had a question. I don't know if you know the answer to this, but according to the Steam Deck documentation, the Steam Deck will run Windows games on Linux using Proton, and he asked if that's right.
I have absolutely no idea. To be honest, I haven't looked at it outside of. I just like what Valve do because they're fun. They experiment with things. So like, I still have my Steam controller and my Steam Link and all the other relatively useless toys I bought from them in the past. So if I'm being honest, I was going to back it regardless. I haven't really looked into it. So I'll let you know when I have it in my hands. But I'm actually not looking at the stats much.
Yeah, that makes sense. I loosely looked at it too, and I was like, "Oh, that's cool. I'll wait till it comes out. Wait till I can get one." So there's a question: how do you learn tool programming? And I don't know. I mean, for me, this was just kind of like learned it by needing to do it, finding problems, and then digging around and trying to find the solutions and ways to find it. To make tools to fix the solutions. But I don't know how you specifically learn tool programming. You got any thoughts on that? I mean, it depends on if they're
No, I was actually thinking exactly what you said, which is the way I learned to develop tools was I needed tools and I had to Google how to do it. Like the kind of if I've got anything close to a catchphrase when it comes to this stuff, I always say write code you enjoy using. I think that to me is the biggest life lesson I ever learned as a programmer. Like you can tell if you're writing code you hate working with. You just have that like pit in your stomach going, ugh, I hate having to use this class I wrote. It's terrible. Every time I use it, it's clunky and I have to register stuff and do all of this nonsense. I wish I could just write thing.do thing I want. And that's like that should be your eureka moment of aha, I should fix this. And the same thing is true for tools. If you find yourself going, oh god, okay, we're changing the weapons, right? Time to drag in 15 entries into a list, or time to like go and ask the client for a bunch of stuff and get the files, and then you know get all of these individual PNG files and drag each one into a button on a label. Or whenever you find yourself doing anything like that, just stop and go, I hate this. This is horrible. What do I wish I could do? Is there a way to automate it? And then just Google it. In my case, I was like, can I avoid having to like find all of a certain kind of asset? And you can. There's asset post processors and pre-processors. There's asset importers, or at a very basic level, you can just use the asset database and do a search. Find me all things of type PNG that have icon in the title and are labeled as thumbnail. There you go. Suddenly an array is populated with all the right ones. And if that ever changes, you press a button and you refresh it. So tool development isn't a thing that I think you can just learn outright to do, because it's not a thing. It's the ability to solve problems. And the way you learn to solve problems is you have a problem and you try to solve it, right? If you want to learn how to save things or read things, you have to learn how to access the file system. And so how do you do that? Well, you kind of go, I wish I could have these settings saved elsewhere in a text file or on a web page, or I wish I could automatically read in all of this stuff. Or if I'm building a map out in a game where I have a bunch of turrets placed on the map, do I want to have to place them every time and move them around? Or what if I had a text file or an image? What if I literally had a Photoshop image that's a pixelated image and I could paint in colored dots and each colored dot turns into a turret when I load it in? Now all of a sudden I can just load a new image in and I just iterate all the pixels, and every red pixel spawn a turret at the coordinate position that matches. Like there's not a correct answer for how to do it. There's just, I wish this was automated. How do I automate it, or how do I simplify it, and then figure out how to do it? Another one is input data. If you need information from somebody, like I need you to pick how much damage these attacks do, or how much this spell does in terms of whatever, or what properties are affected by this potion, or how many turns this card costs. Ask yourself, how would I set that up? Do I have to change a number in Unity? Well, how do I avoid doing that? Can I build a tool, like a little WinForm or a website or a separate Unity application? Maybe I build an actual separate Unity app with a window, with a bunch of input boxes, and I can hand it to somebody. And every time they type it in, I send that somewhere. I send it online, I save it to a text file, I do something, and then I have a button that they can click that'll automatically email that to me. It doesn't matter. There's no right answer. There's just whatever's better than you sitting there spending 6 hours dragging or typing or whatever. And so if you want to learn to do it, then look at your own life. There are problems you're doing. There is something that you do that annoys you, that takes way too much time. Ask yourself if it's possible to make it faster or simplify it, and then just go on a Google spree. learn the pieces that'll make it easier for you.
Yeah, I think solving problems is the best way to learn it, and it's exactly how I did it, and I think it's the best way to learn coding in general. Just find problems either in something that you're doing on the computer, or even sometimes things outside the computer. I don't know how many times I've learned how to code something to solve some other problem that wasn't necessarily on the computer, right? Like I want to figure out how to remotely control some light or other. I've lots of random weird shit that I've done, right? Where I wanted to figure it out. I've built little apps that I could control with an iPad and update a web page to keep track of how good kids were doing with rewards and all kinds of random weird stuff, and come up with an idea and just build a tool around it. So we had a couple super chats pop up. I wanted to just answer these questions. There was do you have a base project that you would work off of for game jams or similar? Things with like a menu option save system, a blank UI and blank UI scenes. Um, Now, I don't personally have something like this, but I thought that you might have some that you recommend as like as some starter packs. I mean, I think that if you were building an FPS and you were able in your game jam, you can use a starter pack, then using one of the ones that we had just looked at, something like that might be a good starting point. But do you have like a core thing that you use that has menus and all of that kind of stuff that does kind of like the
Um,
not so much the gameplay, but the main menu stuff? I mean, save systems I think will be a little bit hard, but maybe there's some generic one for that too?
so there are things, like if I was working with a team of people and it was a game jam or something and needed a UI, I would use something like Doozy. Now, I wouldn't use Doozy for my own project, but I would use Doozy if it was something like a game jam, because that's the kind of thing that you could have a load of people learn very quickly. It's got a nice visual editor, you can drag and drop stuff, and it's simple to work with. Um, to tell the truth, I've been doing a lot of this stuff long enough that I can do it pretty fast. So I don't really use a lot of pre-built tool things because I can just do it myself. I do have some scripts I use, like I have go-to patterns and practices and strategies that I'll use, and so I would say there's probably a few hundred miscellaneous scripts that do everything from dropout stacks to editor extensions for changing colors to animated tweens to undoable commands, just all sorts of random little snippets that I like, but I don't have a preset like base project. I generally think it's a bad idea to start with the kitchen sink. Like I said, no matter what project you're on, like I don't know many successful projects that start with, right, we need to make an X. Let's first bring in the last 50 things we worked on. Ugh, okay, now we can get like everything gets more confusing that way. It makes the whole thing is messier. It's got tons of more stuff. It's harder to figure out what's relative to what you're doing. And like I said, you start to pivot towards what your tools have rather than what you want. I think it's almost always better to start with write exactly the code you need. And if you stop and go, hang on a second, I've done this before, and then go find somewhere that you've done it before. So what I favor doing is, rather than building like my base core libraries and stuff, I tend to just save scripts I like. If I wrote a script and I liked it, oftentimes it's in a separate project and I've got unit tests on it or something, and I'm like, I'll use this again. This is a thing with tests that I can rely on. And if I ever need a terminal system that I can type commands into and undo commands, I have a chunk of code that I have tested it that works, that does this. And so sometimes I'll do that, but I don't like starting with a base most of the time, because you're making a lot of presumptions about what your project needs. So that's personal preference, though. Some people do, but I don't.
Muted myself, but I was gonna say I tend to be the same. I don't have any starting projects or even any like packs that I always pull in anymore. I used to kind of be like that, but now outside of like Text Mesh Pro and occasionally Pro Builder, there's nothing else that I always pull in. Cinema. Oh, I take that back. Cinemachine. I always pull in Cinemachine. Outside of that, there's nothing else that I just kind of always grab. And the menus with game jams, I very rarely have a menu beyond like 2 buttons. Usually don't even remember to add in an exit button, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. It's mostly just about making the game fun and interesting, and then finding cool art for it too. So there was one other super chat about multiplayer.
Hmm.
Do either of you
Oh,
guys have a?
actually,
Oh, did you have another
there's
answer? Go ahead.
yeah, just one last one on that last one. Actually, just as a side note,
Yeah.
one thing, just while I won't have a base project, one thing, 'cause it sounds a little bit, I just want to be very hyper specific here. I don't have a base project I start with. But if you watch the first 2 videos on my YouTube channel, you'll see that I have a start set of processes I do. Almost every project will have roughly the same starting folder structure. I will probably use the same 6 packages. I will almost always use Cinemachine. I will almost always use DoTwain. I'll almost always use the PSD importer. Like, there's a bunch of Unity related stuff that I will like always want to use. And so, rather than having a base project, I like giving myself buttons that say, bring in these things that are specifically this stuff. And so, in the second video, particularly, I highlight how you can have a button that says, bring in the new input system. If this project is going to be one that requires a new input system, here's a button, abracadabra, bring in these things. If it's a game jam, do these things. And I had another video I didn't make, but it's the same kind of principle. I'll often have a button that say, this is a game jam project. And if I click that button, it will set the default settings in editor to window mode. It'll set the default resolution size to 800 by 600, and it will set up a few things like moving the color space from gamma to linear. It'll just do a bunch of like, this is what I do when I make a quick game jam project. And then if I'm building like a HDRP project or something, it'll do the opposite. It'll create a canvas, set the canvas to 380 to 3840 2160. It'll set it to scale with screen size. It'll like, there's like set steps I want, and that's not quite the same as a base project. It's just base configurations, and I don't want to have to copy over a project and set it as a base. I just want 2 buttons, a little drop down that says, make it look like this, make it look like this. And I can then change them, turn them off, toggle bits on and off. When I know there's certain settings that make it into every project, I'll give them a toggle. That's kind of the closest I can get to answer the question more accurately.
That makes sense. So you just got them in there as buttons, and then that's just a video that people can go watch and see the details on exactly how to do that, right?
Yeah, I've got one video on setting up automated folder structures. You press buttons and folders will appear in the right order that you want. I have a second one on how to just pull in automatically files. Like if you want a script to just appear in your project from GitHub Gists, you can do that. And also how to automatically set up packages that'll just like auto install like 6 packages that you want, and you can have different sets and subsets of them. I haven't quite made the third one on how to auto configure it, but it's the same principle. If you're following along, just make an editor tool and change the Unity editor settings. I could be more specific on ones I use, but they're in there. You can have a look.
Everybody go watch them. Go click through them, check them all out. Cool. Anything else on that? Or we want to jump over to the multiplayer question?
Yeah, we can jump over to the multiplayer one.
All right. So, do either of you have a series on implementing multiplayer? It's kind of a big, loaded question because I want to really quickly clarify that talk about multiplayer. There's really, I think there are like 4 4 or 5 different ways that multiplayer can exist, and the version of it that you're talking about is usually when people say multiplayer, they're talking about live real time
Yeah, networks thing.
multiplayer,
Yeah.
right? Multiple people live with a server controlling it, like an FPS, maybe a strategy game, maybe some kind of exploration game, adventure game, social game, MMO, anything like that. A lot of the time, that's what they're talking about. In that case, I have not done a series about that at all. I've talked about it quite a few times. There are some series out there, but the core parts of building a multiplayer game like that don't really, I would say, don't really change. What changes a little bit is the libraries underneath it, the things that are available. Like right now, UNet is pretty much, it's deprecated and dead. It used to be kind of the core way to go, and it was so the way that I had set up some videos. I did a starter pack and some stuff on it, but it's dead. Um, Photon exists, and then there's also Mirror. Two of the key options. I think Mirror is generally, Photon's a little bit easier to get started with and set up. At least from my understanding. I played a bit with Mirror. I used Photon a long time ago, haven't used it recently. That said, there's lots of other types of multiplayer games that are very different too. I have done some stuff on local multiplayer games and done some course stuff on local multiplayer games. Turn-based multiplayer games I've done absolutely nothing on. I don't know about you. Have you done anything on that? Or do you
Nah,
know
not
who?
really.
Because I mean, and really in all of these, like I would say, I don't have a good series on any multiplayer stuff. So, I maybe would talk about. Do you know of anybody who does have a good multiplayer series that kind of covers maybe one or two, any different types of multiplayer game
So
development, whether it's local,
if
online,
if
turn-based, asynchronous, synchronous?
if you're getting started with multiplayer, check out Dapper Dino. He's got a great series on getting started with multiplayer stuff. Blackthorn Prod is currently doing a video series on multiplayer,
Blackthorn
and
Prod.
he's got the first 2 videos done there. Then there is a couple of other good ones. Let me see. What's the other one that I liked? Um, Infogamer is another great series. First Gear Games, that was another good one. Um, oh, Rugbug had a really great series on multiplayer. There's a lot of them. Like I honestly, like you just type multiplayer Photon Unity, and there's actually a lot of really good starters here. Like I can't stress enough. If you're just looking for a first person shooter, there is like 50 different YouTubers who have a series of making themselves a first person shooter, and you can just follow along. Like just one, but literally line by line. Make a lobby, make the room, add the player controller, create the bullets, learn how to, like, there's so many. It's just like you won't have a hard time if you literally type first person shooter Unity into YouTube, right? Um and that's why to me I'm not really interested in making a series like that, because like it'd be one thing if I thought they were all terrible, but there's some really good tutorials there. Like I wouldn't be adding much to that space, right? There's already some pretty good ones. Um so
Yeah, I tend to agree. That's, I mean, for me, the reasons I haven't done it are, one, it's been a little while since I built a multiplayer game, so or like really built it from scratch and did it well. So I'd worry that, maybe it wasn't perfect. And I tend to get stressed about that. Like, hey, what if this is, if I accidentally show something that's not optimal? And two, it's just like there's so much involved that most people aren't going to follow along once you get beyond like the very basics. Maybe 1 out of 100 people that watch the first part will watch the end, just because it's so complex and such a it's something that just not a lot of people want to watch and do and go all the way through. But that said, there are lots of good examples out there. But what you'll probably see is that most of them don't have a ton of views because, yeah, just at least on once you get to like part 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, it starts to drop really quick.
also there's like for things like multiplayer, there's so many levels. So if you want to go from I have nothing to I have a capsule to I have a multiplayer set of capsules, that's pretty easy in terms of like you could set it up in a few hours, following a few guides, and get you started. If you're trying to do something scalable, God forbid you're trying to make your own MMO, which we always advise against for the most part, um, or you're trying to build something larger, you have to start worrying about basically avoiding people messing with your game. And we've talked before about the topics of like you need to understand networking at that stage to start making good decisions. And you can't just rely on a random asset. Like once you start getting to the point that you understand how a game can be messed with, you need to understand what should live on the server and what should live on the client and what you should accept and what you should trust in terms of events and messages. And like it's just too big of a topic. And the truth is, you're not really going to find one good resource for it. What you're going to do is you're going to follow a guide, get you started, you'll start hitting problems, and you'll start Googling. And you'll bit by bit find very targeted videos how to do prediction in my multiplayer game correctly or whatever. And you will find a very
How to
specific
make my
video.
character stop bouncing around.
Yeah, exactly. Or how do I stop players teleporting themselves with commands or whatever? And you'll find something and it'll guide you through the steps. There's not going to be a comprehensive start to finish because, like, where do you go from there? There's so many areas to talk about that it's just, that would be an exhausting series to make.
Yeah. I'm sure it's out there somewhere, but it's a lot of there's a lot to it. So there was a question here about whether we plan to do any videos with attributes and reflection. I wanted to pop this up because I thought you probably will. I know like you like to do lots of stuff on attributes, and I'm actually doing one in my course. The last video that I was exporting that didn't get exported yet is on using an attribute in and reflection for inspector attributes to do some custom
Yep.
inspector stuff. Nice, simple, easy way to hide stuff. So, but do you plan on doing anything with attributes? I know you
Hmm.
like to use them a lot.
I do use them a lot. And I'm worried about how far to go into that because, again, there's sort of like pre stuff I'd like to cover, but
Mhm.
I will be covering attributes. Like for example, one that's kind of in an upcoming video at some stage. You might have actually noticed in my second video, or was the third one? Might be the third. One of the videos, someone pointed out that they noticed I use I use an automatic keyboard shortcut. So I have you'll notice that like auto populates a lot of the code for me. I don't write out the long winded stuff all of the time.
Mhm.
And so one of the things I do is I mark my required attributes, my private fields, with a custom attribute called required, and that just lets me know that this script won't run without that reference dragged in, and that gives me a lot of power later because it means I can start doing things like find all scripts with required attributes if they're missing, check for a method called fix missing references. If that exists, run that method, populate them, read. Like there's a whole load of stuff I can do once I've like pre-marked things as being required. So that's one of the most common attributes I'll use. Like every single time I have something like this is a scoreboard system and it needs the place to send the scores to, or this is a clock and it needs a label to send it to, I will always have a little reference and it'll tell me this is blank, and then I can kind of automatically have it populate itself when it's missing. So that's one that I will cover. And then the other one is just custom property drawer stuff, where sometimes you want to have like a read only label. That's one thing that infuriates me. Unity has no way out of the box to have a read only label in the inspector. You actually have to write a custom inspector just to show a label. It's very frustrating.
That's interesting.
Um,
Yeah, that seems like a one that should get added. I wonder.
there,
Yeah,
there,
watch me go to request it and find out they just added it.
There actually is a really great set on GitHub. I think it's called like naughty attributes or something, and it has a whole load of these. It has some really nice ones. Just an attribute for button, an attribute for a read only, a couple of the ones that quite frankly should just be there.
It should just get added
Um,
in. Yeah.
and so that's a great way. But again, like I don't like using it. I don't like anything that requires me to have other people require that in my code. So I tend to not export those. I would literally just write a custom inspector because then it's one script. They don't have to have anything else. Just the
Don't have
two
to have that whole
scripts that they
package to get it. Yeah.
yeah.
Totally agree.
But yeah,
So-
it's like yeah.
Yeah. I just wanted to share this comment Paul made too about gists are nice for saving scripts. If you haven't used it, it's just .github.com, gist.github.com, and you
Mhm.
can just paste in your code. It'll auto detect the file format when you put in the file name with the extension, code it, and let you share it and embed them. They're amazing. I use them all the time for sharing code and for saving stuff. You can just use them to
Mhm.
save off your things if you want, but I primarily use them for sharing stuff.
And like I said in one of the videos, I covered how what I really love doing, because it feels like magic, is you can save a script you like on a gist, and then you can just use the HTTP client class to do a GET request, pull down the file, save it to a file, and drop it in the project. You can effectively make a button that says, "Oh, bring in my scene manager," or whatever it is, whatever custom, or "Oh, here's my color extension script." I can just have a button that will just automatically go to GitHub, grab the file, download it, drop it in my project. You don't have to go through packages, don't do anything fancy. You can just say, "Get it," and put it in my project. And that's really satisfying. And it's just by storing it on a gist.
Yep. Yeah, they're a handy and yeah, free. It's nice. Right. All right. I also wanted to ask everybody to hit the thumbs up button and share the stream if you haven't done it already. And I guess to take just a couple more questions before we wrap things up. I got to make it a short one, and we'll be back again on Sunday, right? You're here Sunday. Yep, we'll be
Yep.
back Sunday. So, yeah, if anybody's got any other questions, we'll take maybe 2 more and then wrap things up for the day. And go through and see if there was anything else up above too. Oh, any word on what Andrew's doing? I believe he is working
Working, I think.
in
Yeah.
uh, and building a game. And somebody asked if these podcasts are available somewhere. Not yet, but that's something I am working on. I'm thinking maybe we'll get all of the episodes put up somewhere and then start to regularly put them up somewhere, so that they're available for people who don't want video or just want to listen on their drive or whatever else. Um, and then Jason Story's got a comment there. We'll pop that. Feel free to watch something shorter. Oh, I didn't see what that's what it was. Oh, then it was boring. I totally missed. I got to pop that one up. Yep, I agree. Right.
I never understand those kinds of comments. Like, hey, if you don't like content, that's fine. But if you're like, "I'm here of my own volition, not liking something, and I'm going to sit here and continue to not like it," it's like, okay, just do something else, man. Enjoy yourself.
Sometimes I watch things that are boring too, though, and I'll sit there. I'm like, this is really boring, and I just keep watching it. So if you're doing that, hey, I appreciate it. Just keep watching, let it play. Go ahead and go do the dishes and leave the stream running. And hit thumbs up first if you want to. Can you do a tear apart my game type stream? I think
I
this
love
would be
code reviews, man. I will anytime anybody wants a code review, I will happily sit there and code review.
I
It's one
think
of my
this would
favorite
be
things to do.
interesting. We need to plan it out. I actually I got an email I wanted to share. I don't want to pull it up right now because it's kind of live, but about a new subreddit too, where they do exactly this, where they kind of tear apart games and talk about the code and go through it and give feedback on it. I thought that would be really interesting. I just crazy weekend. I didn't get a chance to look at it yet, but I want to dig through that, and I thought maybe we could talk a bit about that and do some code tearing
Yeah,
apart.
sure.
So yeah, if you're interested in having your game torn apart, on your code torn apart, and you're okay with sharing it, you're allowed to put it out there. You're not under some NDA. You're not going to get in trouble at work or anything else. And you can send it over. Send me an email, jason@game.courses, with just a quick overview of what it is. And then I will see if we can take a look at it. I don't know how many we'll get to do, maybe 2 or 3. We'll see. See how long it takes, but I think that would be a lot of fun, and we'll do that either on Sunday or as a special stream some other time shortly before or after that. Somebody asked what I was eating. It was just my Doritos and my 20-calorie Rockstar. See, 150 calories and 20. I got to stop with these and more of these, I guess, or find something better. Right. And do you have any plans with Unreal 5? No. I mean, to play with it, yes, but to actually use it, probably not. And then just play around, experiment a little bit, and see some of the cool new stuff. But I just don't have the time to really dive too deep into it. And
Yeah,
then,
I haven't really played with it. I played with Unreal 4 when it first came out. It was fun, and I did UDK back in the day. But it's not. There's too much to do in life. That Unity stuff is keeping me busy as it stands.
yeah. So I guess I'll take this one for the last question. And yes, it is a breakfast of champions, Daniel. Doritos and Rockstar. I haven't had a chance to have breakfast yet. So it was a hectic morning. So I think we'll take this as the last question. I think it's a great one. Have you ever worked on a project which was really life changing for you? And if so, what about it was so monumental?
Well, I've got two answers, so you go first.
Okay. I mean, I think that the answer is definitely Yes, and I think that if you work on, any game, if you're in the game industry, it's probably gonna be a yes for you no matter what. It's gonna be something that's been pretty life-changing for me. Uh, for me, the biggest one, it was probably the first real big AAA game that I got to work on, which was Vanguard, which you can kind of see. Oh, yeah, you can kinda see a little bit of the, one of the posters right there in the mirror underneath. It's one of the many Vanguard posters that I've got up. And I mean, for me, it was just a big introduction into both into the industry and into the reality of just how games and big projects are made, that kind of getting an actual insight and seeing that it's really just, it's a bunch of people coming together. All of them know a little bit of stuff, nobody knows all of it, and they're all kind of combining these skills and putting things together. And there's a big variety of just tasks and skill levels and things to do when you're working on a game. It was just, for me, it was eye opening, because I'd always, in the old days, I'd thought of like game development is like this one genius. Like, you've got John Carmack here. He sits in a room with some crazy artist, and then magically a game appears, right? And like, if you're not that, you're not the wizard and the magical artist, a game doesn't appear. But then I saw like the actual process of games being made, not just the game I was working on, but in the studio, I see lots of games being made, and seeing just kind of how, I wouldn't say hectic, but how it's kind of like coming together. It's not just this magical wizard casting a spell and a game appears. It's a bunch of people struggling with all these different problems and trying to find solutions to things, trying to figure out what's good, what's bad, and going through that process. And for me, it was just learning that, this whole thing of making something big and making something giant isn't just like an overnight, like, magical thing, or a thing that requires like this big giant structure and a whole bunch of stuff. It just requires a lot of passion and a lot of people coming together, really struggling, or really just putting in the effort and working on something. So it kind of, I guess, made me realize that whatever it is that you want to work on and build, like, it's possible. You just have to try. Right? Like, I'd always thought like it'd be impossible to work on one of those games. Like, I could never do that. And then I actually just started applying and trying, and applied a couple times and found out, hey, it is something you can do. So yeah, I don't know. That was
I
it for me.
admit that part, that kind of part is amazing. I have noticed on some projects where you look at just the scope of a project and think, there's too much. I couldn't ever do this. And then you realize it's like, no, your job isn't to make all of that. Your job is to make this thing. And then you give that to the right person. And then other people are all doing the same thing. And you suddenly blink and go, oh, with our powers combined, a game occurs. Like, there's not, you're not responsible for every piece of it. And that's very satisfying. You realize that you can be a cog in a larger project, and that can be quite satisfying. So it means you get to claim ownership of something bigger than what you would have done by yourself. So I've now gotten to 3 answers. I'm going to stop, because if I go any further, I can keep thinking. I think most projects I work on impart some interesting, life changing thing, but I will point out 3 because they're life changing for very, very different reasons. The first one was, I worked on an enterprise piece of software, and I was in a small team of like 4 people, and I was in Ireland, and I poked to this code and built this horrible little form thing using some custom software that I didn't like, that nobody liked using, that was a horrible pain to develop with, and I felt like it was pointless. Like, I was just, none of what I worked on mattered, and I did that for like a year, and then at one stage I ended up having to meet on a different project, which involved me going over to the New York offices. And so I went over to the New York offices for a few weeks. And while I was there, they gave me a tour and whatever. And they showed me one of the teams. And there was like, while I was there, some new employees were being trained. And I went into a room and they said, "Oh, do you want to sit in?" And they were being trained on the software I wrote. I got to sit in the back of a room and watch a room full of people stare at a projector while one person is up there saying, and you click that button, and then this happens, and you do this, and then this. And that, it blew my mind. Like, for the first time, going, oh, people use this. There's actually people in the world somewhere that sit at their desk every day and click the buttons that I place on the screen.
Mm.
And every decision I make, every, like, did I make the button slightly too small? Did I misspell submit? They're going to see that forever. and it like it's not that I didn't know that, but it's like it didn't feel real
Mhm.
until there was a room full of people, and then I got to stop and go, oh, I don't have to see this as me being a soulless cog in a machine writing software I don't care. I can take pride in the fact that there's people who sit there and hate their jobs as much as I hate mine, but I get to make their life easier. I can write software that they can sit there and have a good day and go, "Oh man, that's great. This is so much easier than the last version." I'm like, "I know, right? Because I wrote it." Now, I'll never get to hear them say that, but I know it's out there because I've been that guy. I've been the opposing person sitting there using someone else's crap software. So it gave me a lot of pride, and I started to care about building better stuff. So regardless of how horrible the project was, I started to enjoy it because I knew what it was for, right? It felt more empowering for me. So that completely changed my perspective. So that's
That makes
one.
sense. And on
Um,
that note, I was gonna say that sometimes you do get to hear it too. Like if you're working on a game team and
Games
you're building
especially,
game
yeah,
dev tools for your designers
yeah,
and you make it better, you get to hear it. They're like, "Oh, this is way better." But as soon as you screw it up and it's crashing, they're like, "Ah, you broke it. This sucks. Like, what
yeah,
the hell did
yeah.
you do?" So, but yeah, you
Especially,
definitely, and that is great. Like when you can give
mm,
designers a tool and like the thing that was going to take them a week now takes them 5 minutes. They're like, "Oh shit, this is awesome!" Like, thank you, just saved my week and made the results better. That kind of thing is great. All right,
yeah,
what was
yeah.
number two?
Um, yeah, because there's so many more like that. Like I told you before about the scanner one, but I won't repeat that one. But yeah,
Yes, the button. I had a
yeah, yeah,
picture of that. I was gonna send. I saw somebody sent me a great I forget where it was. I'll send it to you. It was this video of it, the UI, and it's just popping up every time. I click OK. You clicked OK. Or no, I remember the one I was thinking of. It said enter your weight, and it's like 22 kilograms. You click OK, it pops
yeah,
up.
yeah,
You set your weight to 22 kilograms. I was like, hey, it's like a Jason Story UI.
yeah, yeah. I learned that mistake the hard way.
Uh,
So the second one was actually it was a project that I worked on with a bunch of artists, and it was the first big contract job I worked on. And the reason this one was life changing was, um, whatever large journey got me here to this stage, and eventually somebody said they wanted me to work on their project, and they offered me what was effectively at the time more than 2 years worth of my salary for 6 months work. And so that was a big leap for me because that was somebody saying, "You have to quit your job. You have to lose all job security. I can't promise you any more work till after 6 months, but for 6 months, I can give you 2 years worth of income." And that to me was like the "Do you want to become a contractor?" quest, right? Do you take the quest officially? And so I really struggled over that because I had a job and the company was willing to offer me options, and I could have taken stock in that. I could have worked on it for a few more years. I knew all of the managers; they were friends of mine. Like I could have like set a career there, and I chose not to. I chose to go out alone, and I'm glad I did. But it was like that was me officially taking ownership of my career. And that was a big one. Um, so
That's
very
an
different
important thing to
reason.
do too. I think a
Mm.
lot of people they get just kind of afraid and stuck in a place and never leave because they're afraid that if they leave, they won't be able to find another job. But in my
Yeah.
experience, if you can code and you can write code and just practice talking to people a little tiny bit, it's not very hard to get programming jobs. I mean, again, it probably depends a lot on where you are. The benefit of being near a bunch of tech companies and programming jobs, but
And
in
yeah,
my
you have to
experience, it's
upskill,
never
right?
been like a something that I would always recommend. Like if people aren't sure that they want to stay at their company, look around, start looking at other options, and if you get a great opportunity like that where you're gonna essentially quadruple your pay, you should probably heavily consider it and just realize that
Yeah.
you got that job the first time, you could probably get that job or something else similar to it again, and you're
And
getting this other
you're
opportunity.
already you're more qualified than you were when you got that first job. You're already in a better position than you were from the last one. Um, so that was two, I guess. And the last one is shorter. The last one was a small game jam style project I worked on. But what was really cool about this one is this was at the heyday of like VR was really popular. And as a direct result of this stuff that I was working on, I got an invite to go to like a private Facebook party thing. And there was like, that was my first ever large company thing where you're in a room full of people and you're hearing private stuff about what's coming out with new hardware, because obviously devs need to know about the new hardware before the consumers do, so they can literally integrate it and use the SDKs and answer questions and whatever. So that was my first time peeking behind the curtain. And what was really fun for me was, like, loads of people are invited to those. So I'm sitting there, like, you go through the boring corporate bit, you get to try out the secret hardware, you get all the fun stuff. In my case, it was the Oculus Touch before it ever came out. But then you go to the bar. And that's where the fun stuff happens. And you start to meet people and just have a chat. And you realize these are people who make games you play. Like, I was just chatting to people and they're like, "Oh, what do you do?" And it's like, "Oh, I make game X." And I'm like, that's installed on my computer right now. That game is on my desktop as we speak. And then you get to have a chat about people in the industry, same as you. And there's other stuff too that was really fun. Like, one of my favorite moments of all time was I was talking to one guy and we were talking about just games in general. And I mentioned one of my favorite game devs, like one of the people who made a game that I think is really niche, no one's heard of, that I think is a really cool game. And he Skypes the guy on the phone right there in front of me. It's like, it's just so mind blowing. And like, I had no reason to believe this. Like, how would this guy even know who this other guy is? Never mind know him, right? That's so mind blowing to me. And it just showed how small it can be. Like, once you start hanging out in the right circles, it's the same people get invited to the same events that talk about the same stuff. And so I left that trip where I was like multiple nights out drinking and meeting people and stuff. And I realized, okay, this is a career I want. That's like, that changed my perspective on my own objectives, right? Because it's like, okay, so this is a career. This isn't just playing around with games. There is like people who are making money, and there is careers and companies and peers, and there's like a reason to do this that's actually viable. Because we've talked before about how, from your perspective, you're in a tech hub, right? So you see this all the time. I'm the classic, like, middle of nowhere country guy, right? So for me, it always felt like a silly dream job no one can really have. Nobody really makes games for a living, right? And so for the first time, sitting there and talking to people saying, "Oh yeah, I don't have a full-time job. I make games. Like, I do that as my job. It's not just a hobby." And so those three, the first one changed my perspective on what my job is as a software developer. The second one literally changed my career path. And the third one changed my perspective about what I want to do and how viable these are as careers. So there you go. There's my three biggies, I think.
So yes, yes, and yes. Right. Yeah, I think working in the game industry is a lot of fun too, and the whole thing talk about knowing people who worked on other games. It's the same like when I working at a game company. You talk to people, and they randomly like talk about a game that they worked on. Especially you meet some guys that are older than you, right? Like I met a lot of guys when I started at Sony that were older than me that worked on all kinds of projects that I used to play as a kid and all the games that I played. Like because there's just all these people, they come together, and you see that people go from company to company and kind of commingle, and that's probably how this guy knew the other guy because they've worked together in the past, right? Is my guess. Seems to be the thing. Like if you work at a game company for a little while or a couple of them, you'll find that you can pretty much meet someone working on just about any game if you're interested. There was one more question. I think I'll take this as the last one because it popped up, and I think that we probably both have some insight onto it. And I saw Chris posted or had a question earlier, and I noticed that he had gone completely remote on their office. So I thought it was kind of interesting. So the question was just, how do you think the COVID era will and the move towards most jobs working from home will affect the game industry? Will more game dev jobs be remote? Definitely. I know a lot of game devs whose jobs have become completely remote. In fact, mm, I mm, I'm tempted to say more than half of the game devs that I know have now had their jobs switched to fully remote. It might be less than that, but at least what's coming to mind is more than half are in that position where it's just remote. I think that new hires will probably still be less than half remote just because people get hesitant about hiring somebody at least in the junior positions as a remote position. But if you're in the game industry, I would say now is the perfect time to find a remote game dev job. And remote game dev jobs can be really, really good. I mean, you can I personally prefer it that way because there's just less distraction. There's some really good benefits, I think, if you're a junior developer or you're a game designer to being in the office and kind of interacting and stuff. But when you're coding and just building out the systems, working from home is so much better. Like you can get so much more done. You just have that downside of course, like when you work from home, you're always at work. Like, what do you think? Have you seen kind of the same trend? I mean, I'm kind of curious. Actually, I'm gonna
Yeah,
do a
like
poll about this on YouTube. I'm curious
I
to
would
see what
say our big difference though is that my circles are a lot more indies. Like because again from the VR stuff, it was such a new thing that all of the
Mhm.
people I got to meet are predominantly indie devs, and so a lot of the people I would reference are all between 1 and 10 man studios, right? They're just small groups.
Yeah.
Um, but I
That's
would
most
say so.
studios, though. I'd say most studios are probably between, like, 5 and 10 people, like the
Yeah,
median
yeah,
studio.
and I would say that one thing that kind of interesting that's different from what you were describing as well is with everyone staying at home, a lot of projects are starting. Like a lot of people are like, well, now I'm sitting on my ass at home. If I was ever going to like quit my job or start making games or do my own stuff, now's a good time to do it, because I don't need to go anywhere to do this or whatever. And so I've heard a lot of stories of projects starting, of people taking the leap or finally just deciding, if I don't have work anyway, I can stay at home and work on my games or projects. So I find that there's a lot of new game projects starting up around now as well.
Yeah, definitely a good time to get into it. Alright, well, I think that was it for the questions, or at least all the ones I wanted to hit today, but we'll be back again Sunday and take a bunch more and maybe get into
Mm.
some code reviews. Was there anything else that you wanted to mention or tell everybody before
Um,
we head out?
I will say just one thing to double down on what you said because William made a comment to reference it. Is yeah, one little bit of life advice is if you do work from home, people you work for will think that you'll spend that time sitting there watching Netflix. People who actually work from home spend all of their time working. Like you'll be sitting there watching a show or playing a game, you'll have an idea and you'll tab out and write some more code because it's always there. So, general life tip, you have to set time zones. You have to limit yourself and say, I work from hours of X till Y, and just don't allow yourself to work on work stuff. If you feel the urge to, you have an idea, write it in Notepad and wait till the next day. Like just don't do it to yourself or you will always be on the clock and you will never get credit for it. Nobody will ever thank you for spending extra time that they're not paying for your own time working on stuff. That just doesn't happen. Like so don't do it. Just life work balance.
Yeah. I tend to agree, although I don't do it very well.
The same. If I'm being
Zach
honest,
asked,
if I'm being honest, me neither. But yeah.
yeah, Zach asked for my email on the code review. It's just Jason@game.courses. Just email over there and I'll get it. All right. I guess we'll just end it by saying thanks everybody for coming out and joining us. Please leave a comment, hit the thumbs up button, or go drop the link on Facebook or somewhere else if you don't mind. It does help a lot. And if you have more questions, I guess you can just email them over, or if you want to send over your stuff for the code review, just email that over and we'll take a look. I'll send them all. I'll forward them all off to Jason, and then we'll talk about them and see when we can take a look at them. I also want to take a look at that subreddit sometime soon. I think that would be pretty interesting. Outside of that, don't forget to check out the game jam down below. I put it in the description so everybody could just kind of click on it and check it out if you're curious about that. And then courses, also check out Jason Story's channel. Go subscribe. We got to get him up to a couple thousand more hours of watch time. Get that fourth video out there. And if you have a good suggestion for him on the video, drop it in a comment here. If you got something that you want to see either one of us do, I guess, especially if you have something you want to see Jason's Story do, because I want to see what suggestions he gets. I get lots of suggestions. I'm curious to see what he's going to get here. So, all right. Thanks again, everybody. Thanks again, Jason. And I guess we'll see everybody soon.
Good luck.